For 1 week only, we're offering you two match of the days for one. We asked 3 ordinary people what they thought.
It's a big day for the fans, the players, and indeed managers.
And you, sir, happy to watch Des and Alan twice in a day?
I've seen both of them quite a lot last month.
Really not impressed then?
Well, I must say I enjoyed watching them.
That's better. And what about new added Motson?
His ability to pick up players was terrific today.
So, thumbs up for two match of the days tomorrow only at the new improved times of 5:35 and 11:30. Offer available while shots last. Teams can go up as well as down.
On BBC One now, a summary of the news with Jill Dando. Good afternoon. Tony Blair has been given a rapturous reception at Downing Street, where he's paid tribute to the dignity of his predecessor, John Major. Kenneth Clarke has already said he'll be a candidate to succeed Mr Major as leader of the Conservative Party. Labour now have 419 seats and are heading for a majority of 179. The Liberal Democrats have done better than any third party since 1929.
Downing Street has seen nothing quite like it before. Hundreds of cheering, flag-waving supporters lined the street to welcome the new Prime Minister, as Tony Blair and his wife Cherie abandoned their car in Whitehall and made their way on foot to the door of number 10. As he acknowledged the adulation of the crowd, Mr Blair paid a generous tribute to his vanquished opponent.
I should like to begin, if I may, by paying tribute to my predecessor, John Major, for his dignity and his courage over these last few days, and for the manner of his leaving, the essential decency of which is the mark of the man, and I am pleased to pay tribute to him.
A photo call with his children, Ewan, Nicholas and Catherine, before a family lunch inside their new home. 2 hours earlier, John Major had stood at the same spot and said it was time for him to leave the stage.
I shall therefore advise my parliamentary colleagues that I believe that it would be appropriate for them to consider the selection of a new leader of the Conservative Party to lead the party through opposition during the years that lie immediately ahead.
Potential rivals for the Tory leadership include the former Chancellor Kenneth Clarke, who's already thrown his hat in the ring. A short while ago, it was confirmed that Sinn Féin's Gerry Adams had taken West Belfast.
This election sends a very clear message to those in high places in London and in Dublin and everywhere else that the people of West Belfast have a right to be treated as equals.
An early reminder for Mr Blair that tough decisions lie ahead.
And Martin McGuinness of Sinn Féin has just been elected as MP for Mid-Ulster. Other news, and the environment campaigner Daniel Hooper, better known as Swampy, is due to appear before magistrates in Crewe today. Swampy was arrested this morning near the construction site of Manchester Airport's second runway. He's been charged with threatening behaviour, criminal damage and possession of cannabis. A man who served 23 years in jail in Australia for killing 4 people has arrived back in his home city of Glasgow. Archie McCafferty was deported after losing an appeal to remain in Australia. And that's it for now. More news at 5 to 4.
Good afternoon. History's been made in the southeast with an unprecedented victory for Labour. The Conservatives lost 20 seats in London alone. One of the most spectacular swings to Labour was in Wimbledon, where the Conservatives were defending a majority of more than 14,000, but lost. In Berkshire, Labour made 3 gains from the Tories, whilst the Liberal Democrats won Oxford West, a seat they've been targeting for years. Some of the region's best-known MPs were defeated. Defence Secretary Michael Portillo, Mitcham's Dame Angela Rumbold, London's Transport Minister John Bowis and former Cabinet Minister Jonathan Aitken. In the Conservative heartland of Kent, Labour captured 8 seats. Dover, Chatham and Aylesford, Dartford, Sittingbourne and Sheppey, Medway, Gravesham, Gillingham and Thanet South, giving the party its first MPs there since the 1970s. And that's it for the moment. Now let's take a look at the weather prospects with Suzanne Charlton.
Good afternoon. A lot of warm and sunny weather around across many parts of the country again this afternoon. The temperature at Gravesend's up to 25 Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit already. Another warm day in many areas tomorrow, but cooling off across Scotland and North East England. And as we move through the holiday on Monday and into the beginning of next week, it will start to get chillier from the north. Today, lots of sunshine still around and strong sunshine too. Little rain in the north of Scotland, extending southwards overnight and in towards northeast England tomorrow. Many other areas further south will be bright with sunny spells, but we'll start to see the chance of a few showers rolling in from the southwest through tomorrow. And then the rain and the showers begin to gather over the country through Sunday and particularly into Monday. And that's how it looks at the moment.
I'm doing my MD on the emotional effects of heart surgery.
Surgeons don't have emotions, do they?
You're a great guy, Alex. We who are about to die salute you.
Where are we going, Alex?
Straight to hell.
Is there a rule about sleeping with patients' wives?
Who said this wouldn't happen?
The Heart Surgeon begins Sunday at 9 on BBC One.
Back to the election news now on BBC One with David Dimbleby.
Good afternoon, welcome back to our election studio. There are a few happy Tories tonight. We'll show you why in just a moment. There are 56 council elections in England, none in Scotland and Wales, conducted yesterday. They've been counting today. Half of them have come through, and here are the only Tory gains of the night. Let's just see the figures. There we are. From no overall control, Conservatives have taken control of West Sussex, Bedfordshire, Kent, Surrey and Lincolnshire. And from Labour, they've gained Bracknell Forest. And from no overall control, Labour has gained Cumbria. So there's that other battle that's going on. Remember, before this election was held, there was a lot of talk about whether John Major would dare hold a general election after the local election results, and of course he didn't. Then there was a lot of talk about whether he'd hold them on the same day, because it was thought somehow he'd want to protect Conservative councillors, as opposed to deciding for himself what was the best date for him to go. Well, not sure he got the best date for him, but maybe no date would have been any good for him. But anyway, at local level, the councils are recovering some of the ground, the Conservatives are recovering some of the ground that they lost 4 years ago. And so with a very high turnout, of course, a lot of people probably voting in council elections who don't normally vote. Turnout 71% or so of the country as a whole. Anyway, some Conservatives who'll be going home and not drowning their sorrows, but celebrating victory. Now let's go back to Northern Ireland and have a look at the implication of these two Sinn Féin seats that have been gained, and of the new picture of Northern Ireland with Peter.
David, there's the old picture as we estimated it looked on the new boundaries. Northern Ireland has one more seat now, 18 instead of 17. The UUP had 9, the SDLP 4, the DUP 4, Sinn Féin no seats in the old Parliament, and the others, there's Rob McCartney up here in North Down, just 1. Now this is what we think the new map of Northern Ireland will look like, based on the fact that Sinn Féin, a darker green here, have won West Belfast and the Mid-Ulster seat. Quite comfortable win for Martin McGuinness in Mid-Ulster over here, and Jerry Adams winning West Belfast. Only 3 SDLP seats so far, but there are actually 4. Foyle we're forecasting is going to go, and also West Tyrone will go for the SDLP in the end, but we still haven't had the West Tyrone result yet. Here is the position then at the moment. We have the two gains. Sinn Féin gaining Mid-Ulster, which is a new seat, half of the old Mid-Ulster here, and Belfast West going down for Sinn Féin, and down north that's Robert McCartney taking it over. James Kilfenna won it in the last Parliament, so it's not actually a serious gain, just changing from one independent to another. Here we have the share of the vote, 32% the UUP over here on the left, that's David Trimble's party, 15% the DUP, the Alliance Party with 8%, 23% the SDLP, way ahead in terms of share of the vote from Sinn Féin over here. But the changes that represents, let's just see what changes on the last election that will imply so far. Down 3.5% the UUP, up 2.1% Ian Paisley's party in the seats they've been fighting. The Social Democratic and Labour Party, much the same sort of level of vote they had before, but Sinn Féin, a 6% increase. Clearly Sinn Féin have got the advantage in the competition within the nationalist community. David.
Thanks very much, Peter. Ian Paisley had a victory in North Antrim, though his majority was down 5,000 or so at the expense of the Ulster Unionists. But anyway, he won his seat that he's held for 30 years, and this was his reaction to his victory.
My vote went up here by an enormous 27% from the Forum election, although the Unionist Party had written me off, and the IRA Sinn Féiner said I was a sad old man. Well, I'm not sad today. I'm very happy that I have held my seat and increased my vote by 27%.
Dr. Ian Paisley, and now we're joined by the Reverend William McRae, who's just lost his seat in Mid-Ulster. Mr. McRae, can you tell me what actually happened there? How did Sinn Féin come through to take the seat?
Because Sinn Féin certainly has a very strong vote in the constituency, and also many of the SDLP have been watching John Hume's antics over this past number of months, and he has been flirting with Gerry Adams, and therefore why would they not go for Sinn Féin in the election whenever it came about?
But what do you think the message this sends to people in the United Kingdom as a whole, to Sinn Féin gains?
Well, I think there's a very clear message. John Bruton and Dick Spring and John Hume clearly stated there was no place to hide as far as this election was concerned. A vote for Sinn Féin was a vote for murder, was a vote for anarchy, was a vote for violence. That's a very solemn message for anyone ever to deliver. And sad to say, the people of Mid-Ulster have stated that as far as they're concerned, even during a campaign of terror going on within the United Kingdom, that as far as they're concerned, they're quite happy to live with that. That's a very serious message.
Of course, you lost a few voters compared with last time round. Why did that happen? Well, were you too ferocious? But were you too ferocious for your constituency?
Well, I don't know whether you actually have actually been looking at the figures. I didn't lose any votes at all. In actual fact, I went up from 14,500 during the Forum election between the two Unionist parties, and I went up to 18,411 votes. That's certainly not a loss.
I was comparing it with the 19,274 you had last time round.
Yes, because a completely new constituency. The boundary changed since the last election, and everyone knows that lives in Northern Ireland that as far as the new boundary is concerned, it is very pro-Republican.
So you're victim of one of these psephological quirks of the way that the new boundaries have been worked out?
That is the truth, and I personally believe that it was gerrymandered in that way. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's not William McRae's loss in this election. It's those who believe in democracy, because remember now the representative of Mid-Ulster is the leading member of the IRA and the Army Council. That's a very serious message to send to the people of Mid-Ulster and to the people of the United Kingdom as a whole. For example, what a message to say that they have a representative who believes in an organisation that believes that you can murder your Protestant neighbour, and if there's a dissenter within your own group, you have a right to murder them as well. That is not democracy, and sad to say, the people, the good people of Mid-Ulster, will suffer because of it.
Mr. McRae, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Jeremy.
David, well, although it might seem that there are precious few Conservatives left in the House of Commons, there are in fact one or two new ones going there. First-time MPs who won safe Conservative seats, although in each of the cases of the three who are joining us now, the Conservative majority was slashed significantly. Nick St Albin took Guildford, Graham Brady took Altrincham and Sale, and Damien Green took Ashford. Let's look at the future of your party rather than looking backwards. Graham Brady, tell us who ought to be the leader?
I'm not going to answer that question now, Jeremy. I think we've got a period of weeks to look at who the candidates are, to consider who the best candidate will be, and for us all to reflect on it and decide who the best candidate will be to lead the party into the future.
Give us a thumbnail sketch, apart from, and leave out all the generalisations about being a good chap and being capable of leadership. What is the single most important policy?
I don't think there is a single most important policy. I think that the key thing is that we have somebody who can get the Conservative Party back into government in 5 years' time.
Nick St Albin, do you have any idea who ought to lead your party?
Of course I do, but I think you have to recognise that parties are sometimes rather like families. There are some discussions which are better taking place behind closed doors rather than in public. And I think the other point is...
the most ludicrous assertion.
Not at all, not at all, particularly at this stage. I mean,
you've just spent the whole election trying to persuade us that you're a credible, coherent force with everything open to inspection.
Absolutely, and last night the earth moved. We all know that. There is a new agenda today.
Your manifesto ruled out a single currency, didn't it?
I made it clear that I'm opposed to a single currency,
So presumably you could not vote for anyone to lead your party who would not rule out a single currency?
I think that's a very good point, but on the other hand, we've got to see how it goes.
Right, Damien Green, will you give us a clue as to who you think ought to lead your party?
I think anyone who thinks that the most important thing is to talk to the electorate at large and not to the party as a whole. I think the great problem we faced is that we all turn inward and argue with each other instead of trying to communicate
But you
outwards.
have just been talking to the electorate and they've turned around and blown a raspberry at you.
Absolutely, and the reason they've done that is because we've appeared disunited and we've looked more interested in one or two issues which excite us and don't excite all the electorate, and what we should do is talk about what interests
David Dimbleby.
John Prescott arriving in Downing Street, the first of the senior Labour people, I think, to come here, looking very cheerful as he goes down, just being a doorstep there by the BBC's correspondent properly, but no comment to him, and going to number 10 to hear whether Tony Blair will make him Deputy Prime Minister formally or Deputy Prime Minister with responsibility for a spending department as well. And the usual shouts before he goes in. I've always wanted to do this, says John Prescott as he stands on the door of number 10 and waves. Maybe he'd have liked to have done it as leader of the party, but anyway, I've always wanted to do it, and in he goes. And if he comes out again, we'll hear what's happened. Jeremy.
David, thank you. Well, let's continue this looking glass conversation. We have all three of you not prepared to name a person or indeed identify political characteristics of a leader, correct?
No, I've identified some characteristics. I think it's somebody who will think that talking to the outside world is more important than conducting intra-party warfare.
Well, you'd say that of any leader, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily. I think I can think of parties that have had leaders who, Neil Kinnock, for instance, was somebody who was brilliant at conducting intra-party warfare in the Labour Party, but wasn't fit to be Prime Minister.
Would you support a leader who ruled out a single currency?
Well, I don't think that matters very much, because in a
What do you
bizarre
mean it
way,
doesn't matter?
Because by the time we come to the next election, by the time we come to the next election, that decision may well have been taken.
May.
Yeah, but I think that it's the sensible thing is to think through what happens next year.
You couldn't go with somebody who wanted to go into a single currency.
What do they want to go into it tomorrow? No.
Right.
But I mean, no one's that I'm aware of is ruling it out forever. I mean, I haven't ruled it out forever, but I've said it'd be very unwise to rush into a decision. And I think most people would agree with that.
Now, well, let me help you a little bit then. We know that a number of people have already thrown their hats into the ring for this job of leading the party that you have been elected to represent at Westminster. Kenneth Clarke. Is he a viable leader, do you think?
I don't think there is anyone who is in the running to be leader who is not a viable leader. They've been part of a very successful government.
But he believes in something you say you can't believe in.
No. Kenneth Clarke is asked to keep his options open. He's kept his options more open than
ruled
I
it
would
out.
personally. Let's see what Kenneth Clarke says.
But how can you keep your options open and rule it out?
You can't do both, but different people can do different things. The whole point about an option is you can have it both ways. That's what an option means. It's a choice.
Do you think this curious position of believing two contradictory propositions at the same time might be one of the reasons you lost the election?
Oh, I think recognising that there are two options available and that we're not going to make our minds up on them yet, some of us would not want to make our minds up on them for a long time, that policy is a very sound one and is in the national interest.
Graham Brady, do you at least accept the reality that your party is split from top to toe on this issue?
I find that most people in the Conservative Party, the vast majority, are opposed to a federal Europe. I found not only the majority of my constituency association, the vast majority, but also most people on the doorstep are very concerned about the prospect of a single currency. I don't think there's a great division.
Are you trying to tell us, in all seriousness, there is no division in your party on the question
I'm
of a
trying to
single
tell
currency?
you that in the last 4 weeks, as I've gone about my constituency, I found the overwhelming majority of people are very keen that we don't go into a federal Europe and we don't have a single currency.
That wasn't my question. My question was whether the party was divided. You're trying to tell me that black is white.
No, not at all. Undoubtedly, there are some people who have a different view from mine, but I would say that the vast majority of the party is absolutely clear it does not want to see a federal Europe.
Right. Curious then that you've lost power to a party which believes in giving more power to Europe, isn't it?
I think it's one of many curious things about this election, curious to lose power when you're doing a very good job in government.
OK, I'm going to interrupt you there. David.
Thank you, Jeremy. Peter, what have you got for us? You've been looking, first of all, at who the public thought ought to be the leader of the Conservative Party. What about what they want from this government?
Well, I think the interesting thing here is as much what they want from this government. I said earlier that there's sort of warning to this government that they do want it to be socially responsible, that they don't want, for example, further privatisation and so on. But if you look at that as applied to the Tory party in its view of what sort of leadership, what sort of policy agenda it should pursue now in opposition, just look at this. We asked all these voters yesterday what they thought about putting a penny on income tax.
Peter, just to stop it, this is yesterday. Questions asked yesterday.
This is questions
of people
after
leaving the polling.
Absolutely,
booth.
after they voted yesterday.
So it's hot off the press.
Yeah, absolutely. And here we have them being asked the question, how about a penny on income tax for schools, the Liberal Democrat agenda? Well, you'd be surprised. 72% said that they agreed. Now, the Labour Party aren't suggesting that there should be one penny on income tax for schools. It's only the Liberal Democrats who do. Here we have voters, and all voters here redistributing wealth to the worse off. Here we have 58% saying that there should be redistribution. And many of these people are people who've moved to Labour, which is clearly not saying there should be any higher income tax. They're not absolutely specifically saying openly there should be redistribution, although of course they say they're the party of the many, not the few. Redistribution isn't a word that's very high on Labour, hasn't been high on Labour's agenda during the campaign. Disagree with that, only 15%. Similarly, talking about privatisation, a message to the Conservatives here. If you think that a right-wing leader carrying more privatisation into effect is a good idea, 74% think no, we don't want to see any more privatisation. So a very interestingly centre-left agenda for something like 3/4 of the voters we talked to. David.
Peter, thank you very much. I don't know whether Anne Perkins down at Smith Square was able to hear all that, but it seems to be the message coming out of the polling booth, huge majorities against the sort of things the Tories were standing for, Anne.
David, yes, hello. I'm joined now by David Willits, chairman of the Conservative Research Department, a man who obviously had a major hand in drawing up the Conservative manifesto and will continue to do so in shaping Conservative policy in the future, and also Michael Dobbs. But David Willits, it's the first time we've had a chance to talk to you. With hindsight, would you have done anything different?
I think that obviously there are lessons that we're going to have to learn, lessons that we have to absorb about, for example, the presentation of the party, so it's made clear to the electorate that we're a united party. The electorate doesn't like the appearance of disagreement and disunity. That's certainly an area where we need to look and learn.
Are you saying it was disunity rather than the policy itself on Europe that was the problem?
You know, I would say a defeat like this cannot be explained by any one factor on its own. I think there are several different factors. Disunity was one. I think another problem was that, paradoxically, the economy, despite being so strong, didn't appear to work to our advantage. I think it made people feel it was easier to take a risk with Labour.
Do you sympathise then with Ken Clarke, who felt that the economy wasn't promoted enough as a positive issue during the campaign?
Well, I think that we tried during the campaign to put across the message on the economy, just as we tried during the campaign to put across the message on Europe. I don't think now is the right moment to get into a detailed post-mortem, but certainly I think that one of the points on the economy was that paradoxically the more upbeat we were on the economy, the more people thought, well, things are going so well, even a Labour government couldn't make a mess of it.
Somebody said to me, you know, this election was lost in September 1992. It was lost soon after you won the last one. Do you think that was right?
Well, when I was here working for Norman Fowler, which is PPS, and we were in the late 20s, low 30s in the opinion polls, we knew during 1992-93 that we had to get the polls moving upwards. And the fact is that we were stuck for a very long time in that position in the polls, and that meant that regaining those Tories that we had lost was something that we really couldn't do all in the last weeks of the campaign.
Okay, let's start looking forward, because that's really where, as Mr. Major said himself last night, you know, this is where you've got to go. You've got to pick yourselves up and you've got to start again. The first thing is to find a new leader.
Yeah, and I mean, that process obviously will be underway in the light of John Major's statement this morning. But also, it's not just a matter of the individual person who leads our party. It's a matter of getting back in touch with the electorate, learning the lessons of this and formulating the policies that will...
But that is what the leadership campaign is going to be about, isn't it? It's going to be about the nature of the party. Indeed. It is a battle for the soul of the party.
Well, it's also a battle about what we think are the ideas around which the party will unite and the ideas that will enable us to win office and serve our country again in the future.
Michael Dobbs, if I can bring you in here, I'm sorry to have excluded you accidentally. Which way do you think this debate needs to go?
Well, I think most importantly is we should have the debate, because as David was saying, we've been very much victims of our own success to a certain extent. I don't think it's possible to identify a specific issue or even a range of issues which caused this defeat. It really is a matter of mood after 18 years of being in office, and perhaps, as David said, the economy being in the sort of state where people thought that they could afford to take a risk. So the most important thing is not, I think, to get too wound up about specific issues, but if we are going to have a debate, let it be open and frank and free.
First Michael Dobbs, then David Willetts, who is the best person, in your view, to take the party forward?
Well, I believed this morning that it was John Major. Now, John has decided that it's going to be somebody else. The point is you have half a dozen top-weight contenders. I
heard somebody struggling to find half a dozen, but...
well, no, there are plenty of contenders in the Tory party, plenty of very senior and also up-and-coming contenders. There's plenty of old experience there and also new enthusiasm, and I think that's probably the right sort of combination to have.
Who should it be? Who do you think it should be? You know the party very well, you know how it interacts with the country.
I think the party are going to have a really difficult time deciding between those candidates, and I think that there is no clear favourite.
Haig Dorrell at the end of the day?
I would have thought that there might be one or two other names to add to that final 2 or 3.
David, can I ask you, who do you think's the best person?
Well, we don't yet know exactly who will be all the candidates, and I don't think that now is the time for me to say how I would choose between them.
But it is going to be the issue which shapes the future of the party, very briefly.
It's going to be very important for the party, but I don't think that at 4 o'clock this afternoon is the time for me to take a final decision on who I personally think is the right person. But obviously the party, the parliamentary party, we want to get together and think very hard and learn the lessons from that, and that process is already beginning.
David Willetts, Michael Dobbs, thank you both very much. David.
Anne Perkins down at Smith Square. Thank you, Anne. Tony King, there's one curiosity about all this, and I wonder what you think the Tories will make of it, or indeed Labour make of it, which is we've had the lowest turnout since I think it's 1935 in this election. The turnout's always been above the figure that it was last night, 71.2%. What does that tell us about the state of British politics?
Well, it's confession time. I'm not sure I know what to make of it. One possibility is simply that people got bored, absolutely bored, by 6 weeks of campaigning. Another possibility is that people were very confident of what the outcome was going to be and therefore simply didn't bother to turn out. That, by the way, happened probably in 1935 when it was clear that the Tories were miles ahead. Another possibility is that some old Labour voters were disaffected. Nobody noticed, but Arthur Scargill down in Newport East, standing against Alan Howarth, the former Conservative minister standing for Labour, actually kept his deposit. And there may be people out there who were unprepared to vote for New Labour. Equally, there were probably some Tories sitting on their hands. What is striking and what is pretty clear is that turnout doesn't seem to have damaged either party. Where turnout fell most, where it fell least, the two major parties seem to have been unaffected by this. But certainly a lot of people are going to come to the conclusion, I think perhaps a little prematurely, that the style of the campaign really turned an awful lot of people off and that people are turning their backs on the whole political process.
Which is not to say that the Labour lead isn't in simple numbers of people casting their votes Labour very substantial. 13.5 million Labour votes, 9.5 million Conservative votes and 5 million Liberal Democrat votes. Peter Kellner, can you cast any light on all this?
Well, I've been looking at the seats where the turnout has held up compared with the last time and those where it's fallen most. It seems to me that the seats the three main parties really scrapped over, the turnout did hold up.
It excited people, in other words,
that's right.
When there was a battle.
Whereas where they thought it wasn't a contest, it went down. Now,
I mean, some of the northern Labour seats had under 60%.
Terrible turnouts, but the fiercely contested ones where they put all their effort, all their workers, all their leave putting. But the odd thing is, Labour actually captured 1 or 2 seats where the turnout fell dramatically. One example, Milton Keynes North East was a Tory majority of 14,000 last time. I suspect nobody really bothered about it. The turnout collapsed, but Labour captured the seat, which nobody expected them to capture. There does seem to be a correlation between where the parties really put in the effort and the turnout.
Tony King?
There's a tendency for everybody to assume that it's an intrinsic democratic value that large numbers of people should vote. Notice that we tend to get the very highest turnouts in constituencies in Northern Ireland, and that's not a sign of democratic health. That's a sign of the deep social divisions in Northern Ireland. That's a pathological sign rather than a desirable sign.
Though some people think people should be compelled to vote in elections, and that it's not only a democratic right but a democratic duty to vote.
Well, you can argue that, and there are countries, Australia for example, where voting is compulsory. It's not a view I happen to hold. It seems to me you ought to be free not to vote.
Scenes outside Belfast City Hall with champagne being squirted around as Gerry Adams, the leader of Sinn Féin, who took the seat of Belfast West, or West Belfast, comes out. He smiling as his supporters gather around him. He defeated Joe Hendren of the SDLP. A majority of just under 8,000 for a man who won't come and take his seat in the House of Commons. Jeremy.
David, well, I have three journalists with me now. Let's talk first about Tony Blair. You're all out with him during the campaign. And Leslie, do you find him impressive?
I find him a very affable fellow, and when I see his speeches, I used to think, sort of bright sixth former, very sort of eager. Wouldn't his mum be proud? And that sort of thing.
Have a bowl of milk.
Yes, exactly. I mean, very much. There was a lot of sort of, I felt it was, you know, Weetabix time for all these
no, I meant catty remarks.
Yes, no, it may be my advanced age, but I find it very difficult to see him as the great white hope of British civilization.
What do you make of him, David?
Well, I was familiar with Anne's view because I heard it on the bus and I thought it was interesting then. And Anne also said, you know, I've seen Gorby fail and I've seen, you know, states fall and this man doesn't impress me. And I could understand that. Having not seen Gorbachev fail personally, Blair does rather impress me. He's an incredibly disciplined man. He's an incredibly, I think one of your earlier contributors said, focused man. And he's a man who's done an incredible amount in 3 years with one of the most difficult parties in the Western world.
His campaign was incredibly impressive. But I mean, in a way, you could have very impressive campaigns propelling somebody who is not actually about very much into the fore.
I remember you saying, Chancellor Cole will have him for breakfast.
I said he would be a passing croissant in Cole's breakfast
exactly, and I now want to take this better than you. I don't think Chancellor Cole will have him for breakfast at all. I think he'll do rather well debating with the Europeans.
Oh, you poor naive boy.
Let's address this issue, which he has now raised in all the speeches he's made in Sedgefield, at the rally last night, on the steps of Downing Street today, and it's this idea of inclusiveness, one nation. Now, maybe he's only got one speech, or maybe this is the idea of his prime ministership. Simon Heffer, what do you make of it?
Well, all politicians have got to be seen to be trying to involve everybody in the political process. I suppose that's all the more true in an election of such low turnout, where we've been told for ages that the young aren't going to vote, the underclass, whoever they are, aren't going to vote. And obviously Blair wants to say, look, I've not got a sectarian party, I've got a very broadly based party where it doesn't matter what class you are, what religion you are, what your orientations are, I will represent you, I will do something to make your life better. Now, it doesn't really mean anything more than that, and it's only as good as the actions that he subsequently executes when he gets into power.
I mean, you remember when Major came in and wanted a classless society, that's the same sort of thing. Even Mrs. T in her first famous speech on the doorstep of Downing Street, Francis of Assisi. I mean, it's all the usual political fap. I mean, nobody's going to come in and say, I want to run this country so I can grind the faces of the poor, grind the faces of the rich, because they don't get Middle England votes. So, of course, they're going to talk one nation.
Are you more impressed by it, David?
I think it means something, and I think, in a sense, you're too far outside the Labour Party, both of you, to understand the significance of what it actually means. What it means is doing something about the underclass. It does mean that. It means insisting on standards in schools where poor kids go, as well as insisting on standards in schools where...
The Tories had started that process, and the Labour Party was fighting
they had tables. They didn't have standards. When Blunkett goes in there and says, I demand, I failed at 16 because the system failed me. This is about people who actually use state schools and who know what they're like and who want to change them. And that's also the thing behind the 250,000, lift them out of unemployment into work. It may not work, but they mean it.
Well, what I find so worrying about this notion, yes, of course you must get the underclass, whoever they are, let's define them at some stage, involved. But I think it means doing so by an unacceptable level, unacceptable to me as a libertarian, of state intervention. It means going over and saying to people, you're not bringing your children up very well, we're going to do it for you. It means knocks on the door from social workers saying, we, the state, have decided that we have a set standard that you've got to...
So you think inclusiveness actually means intrusiveness?
Well, how else do you do it? If you get if that's the definition that David uses, and I bow to his superior knowledge of the working class movement in this, if that's how you bring people in, then you have to intervene. The state has to go in and say, look, we have a set standard. This is how you're going to bring your children up.
It reminds me of this wonderful Simpsons episode where one of the Simpsons' children was discovered to have lice, and all the social workers descended, took the Simpsons' children out, cleaned everything up.
This is precisely it. Precisely it. Your children don't go to school where children have lice.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
This is a very good example.
All children have lice.
This is a very good example. What happens in that class where the parent keeps on coming back with the child who has got the lice?
Put the parent down.
Everybody keeps getting the lice again, and that's what Labour's about. And you think it's intrusive. The rest of some of us think it's inclusive.
Right. Let's look at another aspect of this. After what happened yesterday, the Conservatives are no longer a British party in Westminster terms. They are an English party. That has quite serious implications, doesn't it, Simon?
It does, because as they are trying to revive, and the revival has to start at the grassroots, they have to adopt different policies for different parts of the country. They have no parliamentary representation now in Wales and Scotland, so their revival there has got to be done solely through the local networks of branches, insofar as they exist. They're terribly depleted now. The activists have been running away for months. They've got no money. So they're probably going to have to use English resources to build them up. Of course, in England, where all the Conservatives' parliamentary representation is now based, they have got to work out how to broaden the base of that support in parliamentary terms. And it must be, when the devolution bill goes through, to be seen to stand up for English interests. That's things like the West Lothian question. It's also things like, well, is the English taxpayer going to have to pay for these Scottish
assemblies? Do you look forward to this English Conservative Party?
No, I think it's a significant danger. I think there is a significant danger that the Conservative Party in England will teach us to try and resent the Scots and so on. And it's a very big argument, actually, for some form of proportional representation that there should indeed be. So there are a lot of Tories in Scotland, there are a lot of Tories in Wales.
You get a quick last word, Anne Leslie, on this subject.
Sorry, I happen to think that, in fact, the rise of English nationalism was already happening. Partly it was the Scots who were encouraging us to be nationalistic, not the Tory party. In fact, whatever you say about John Major, and I say a lot about John Major, one of the things I think he seriously believed in was the Union, partly because he could see the dangers of English nationalism. And I think one of the things that enraged some of the Tories was the use of the symbols of English nationalism by the Labour Party to appeal to the growth of nationalism in Middle England, the bulldog, the flags and all of that.
Yeah, of course, those were symbols of British nationalism, but we'll leave it there.
It wasn't.
David?
Peter, let's have a look now at the Labour highlights of an extremely successful election where it really hit hard and beat the Tories into a cocked hat.
Right, I mean, it really is noticeable how Labour have come back where they did worse in the mid-80s under Margaret Thatcher, when the Tories just cleaned up the southeast of London. Just go in first, have a look at the southeast. Here we have this area where you can see there were just 4 or 5 seats outside London, Thurrock over there, outside London, places like Slough and Oxford East, just a huge, great sea of blue in the last Parliament. The Conservatives over 100 MPs. Now look how it's changed. Extraordinary how Labour have come back. There you are with the Liberal Democrats too popping up in the number of seats here, Isle of Wight, Portsmouth South, and places like Winchester and so on. So it really is a quite complete sea change in the way in which the middle class have thrown the Tories out here and welcomed Labour back as they were in the 70s, and in fact even more than they were in the 70s. The gains flashing there, the new Labour and Liberal Democrat seats in the southeast. Look at the number of Labour MPs. 1966, 21 under Harold Wilson in October 1966. In October 74, 18 of them. Down to 79 to 4 under Jim Callaghan in 1979, and only 1 under Neil Kinnock. There were only 2 Conservative MPs outside London in 87, in the whole of the South, 2 Labour MPs outside London. In 1992, Neil Kinnock got just 3 MPs in the southeast outside London, and now we have Tony Blair here with 36 Labour MPs outside London. In London itself, again, a complete transformation. There's Labour in the last Parliament, just a few MPs there clustered along the Thames and right the way down here to Feltham and Heston in the west. And now look how that too has changed. Here's the changed map of London now, with the Liberal Democrats coming in Richmond Park and Twickenham, and they're holding on to Southwark and Bermondsey there, but the Labour Party gaining seats like Enfield, Southgate, Michael Portillo's seat up there in the north of London. All that is the new Labour conquest in London. And so here we have gains, and notice how the swings in some of these seats here. In places like Brent North, Harrow East, Wimbledon, Croydon North, Harrow West, Hayes and Harlington, and in Michael Portillo's seat, a 17.4% swing. David.
Thank you very much. Peter. Jeremy, rather.
Thank you, David. Well, I'm joined now by two foreign correspondents, one American and one German. Striker Maguire, what do you think that Tony Blair learned from Bill Clinton?
I think the thing he probably learned best was to keep his promises modest, and I suspect that that also means that he will try to be modest in his agenda. He's already said, I believe, that he wants to be careful about not having a grand 100 days agenda, for example.
So, do you find him impressive?
Yes, I do find him impressive.
You had to pause for a second before answering.
Well, only because I think we have a lot more to learn about him. I was impressed by the fact that I think he changed quite a bit during the campaign.
Okay, just say Gordon Brown is now arriving in Downing Street, doubtless going up to number 10, doubtless to be confirmed as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Striker Maguire, you were saying, yes,
he seemed to me anyway, as an outsider who doesn't know him very well, to actually change a fair amount during the campaign. In the way he dealt with people. He seemed to grow into that job a bit better.
Ryan Gassman, one gets the sense that right across Europe this election was being watched and in a sense waited for, things put on hold in the hope that Tony Blair would win because he would be easier to get along with. And yet during the campaign, Blair made more and more sceptical and hostile noises towards Europe. Now presumably that was done for electoral reasons here. How do you think he's going to play in Europe?
No, but I think it started quite earlier, that he distanced himself from the original Labour position towards Europe and moved much closer to the Tory position. And so the first enthusiasm in Europe about Tony Blair has calmed down a little bit, and they are now aware that in many, many positions he will take over the Tory position and be much more critical towards Europe than the impression was at the beginning.
So you don't get the feeling that there's going to be a huge change in Europe?
There will be a change, firstly, in atmosphere, in the climate during the negotiations. And what we will see coming out of them, that we have to wait. But in principle, veto and foreign policy security, I think there are positions between Labour and Tory quite clear. Perhaps it will be possible that Labour is opening itself at a later stage. Right. But at the beginning, it's I don't see any major changes.
Striker Maguire, you made a comparison with Clinton. Is he going to run into the same sort of problems that Clinton ran into with midterm blues?
Well, perhaps midterm blues, but there are certainly a lot of other problems that Clinton has that I doubt Tony Blair will run into.
I certainly hope not. I don't think he's got a cupboard full of skeletons.
I don't think so. Don't think so.
Thank you both very much. David.
Well, Tony King, a last thought about this election.
The most amazing thing about this election is that if we had been sitting here in this studio 5 years ago after Labour's fourth successive election defeat and had been told that somebody who was not at that time mentioned as a possible future Labour leader would lead the Labour Party to a majority of 149 seats 5 years later, I think we would have thought that whoever said that was mad. It is a measure of Tony Blair's success in transforming the Labour Party in the public's eyes that we've got to the point where we accept that there's been a major Labour landslide and we somehow take it for granted.
Do you think he took it much further than it would have been taken under John Smith?
Absolutely. John Smith was essentially an old Labour figure, closely associated with the Labour Party in Scotland that he grew up into in the 1950s, closely associated with the trade unions, with a lot of old Labour ideological baggage. Tony Blair changed all of that.
Let's just have a final look then at the result. The state of the parties, first of all, with just 7 more seats to come in. And Labour, after 652 results, are now on 419, the Conservatives on 163, the Liberal Democrats on 45, the Nationalist parties on 10, others on 15. For Labour, it is its biggest ever Commons majority. It's the largest Labour swing since 1945. For the Conservatives, the lowest number of seats since 1906, and no Conservative MPs at all in Scotland or Wales, perhaps worth adding their lowest vote since 1832. The Liberal Democrats, lowest share of the vote. The Liberal Democrats take the highest number of seats for a third party since the 20s. Winners this afternoon, Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness for Sinn Féin. Both won seats in Northern Ireland, though they won't go to the House of Commons. And also this afternoon, Roger Freeman, the Public Service Minister, lost his seat. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister, for 18 long years my party's been in opposition. Today, enough of talking, he said as he turned to go into number 10, it's time now to do. And also said we've secured a mandate to bring this nation together to unite us, one Britain, one nation. And John Major announcing he was standing down as leader of the party, not immediately, but when it suited the party. When the curtain falls, it's time to get off the stage, and that's what I propose to do. Paddy Ashdown for the Liberal Democrats. We'll seek to work with Labour on those issues where there's common ground and where it's clearly in the national interest. The former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kenneth Clarke, I certainly intend to be a candidate in the leadership election, but we face a long path before us. Baroness Thatcher, a former Prime Minister, we'll now start to rebuild the party for the future. I'm sorry for all those who lost. It's an experience I never had. And these are the highlights of this election day. Well, just before we go, Peter Snow, we can't resist a last look at what the new House of Commons that all that led to is going to be. Let's see what it'll look like.
With Labour in command of the House of Commons as they've never been before, with 419 Labour MPs, an overall majority for Labour of 179, the biggest majority we've heard by any party since before the war.
And Hugh Edwards, briefly, at number 10 Downing Street. Hugh?
30 seconds. David, we have half the cabinet. John Prescott, Deputy Prime Minister, Environment, Transport and Regions, his brief. Gordon Brown will be the Chancellor. Robin Cook will be Foreign Secretary. Derry Irvine will be Lord Chancellor. Jack Straw will be Home Secretary. David Blunkett will be Education Secretary. Margaret Beckett will be President of the Board of Trade. All the other appointments to follow tomorrow. The appointees will arrive this evening.
Well, quite a good list there, much more than we expected of the cabinet. Jeremy, 2 words from you before we go?
3 words. It was fun.
Good. And it certainly was. It certainly was fun. It was also perhaps one of the most dramatic nights, for many people, the most dramatic night in British politics they've seen. It was like 1945 when Labour swept in, like 1979 when the Tories swept in, and this time by a vast majority, Labour has swept into power, completely changing the face of British politics, and for many millions of people, the first time they won't have lived under a Conservative government. Well, we'll be reporting what the new government does, of course. In the meantime, from all of us here, everybody in the election studio, good afternoon.
Fun and sun for senior citizens. But why do they need the chaplains?
Not everybody packs for the holidays and leaves their troubles at home.
For holiday romance.
I was very nervous, but he made it really nice.
For emotional crisis.
They can't leave me alone on holiday.
For moral guidance.
It's not the sort of thing I'd want to go to every week.
A home from home on the Costa del Sol. Everyman, Sunday 10:35 on BBC One.
More from the newsroom now on BBC One, a summary with Jill Dando.
Good afternoon. Tony Blair has been given a rapturous reception at Downing Street, where he's paid tribute to the dignity of his predecessor, John Major. Mr Major is to stand down as leader of the Conservative Party. Labour now have 419 seats and are heading for a majority of 179. The Liberal Democrats have done better than any third party since 1929.
For John Major, the burden of high office is lifted, and this afternoon he wasted no time in putting the election nightmare behind him to do what he enjoys most, watching his beloved Surrey at the Oval. It was all a world away from the extraordinary scenes in Downing Street, where hundreds of cheering, flag-waving supporters greeted the new Prime Minister and his wife, Cherie. As he acknowledged the adulation of the crowd, Mr Blair had warm words for his predecessor.
I should like to begin, if I may, by paying tribute to my predecessor, John Major, for his dignity and his courage over these last few days, and for the manner of his leaving, the essential decency of which is the mark of the man, and I am pleased to pay tribute to him.
2 hours earlier, John Major had stood at the same spot and said it was time for him to leave the stage.
I shall therefore advise my parliamentary colleagues that I believe that it would be appropriate for them to consider the selection of a new leader of the Conservative Party to lead the party through opposition during the years that lie immediately ahead.
Potential rivals for the Tory leadership include the former Chancellor Kenneth Clarke, who's already thrown his hat in the ring. In Northern Ireland, Sinn Féin President Gerry Adams captured West Belfast, and his colleague Martin McGuinness took Mid-Ulster, an early reminder for Mr Blair that he faces tough decisions and soon. One man was avoiding party politics, Martin Bell, Parliament's only independent MP.
Other news, and the Zaire peace talks will not now take place until tomorrow because President Mobutu is too ill to travel direct to the meeting with rebel leader Laurent Kabila. Nelson Mandela, who's left Pretoria to host the talks on board a South African naval vessel, said he's convinced both men want a settlement. A 27-year-old man, Nicholas Burton, has been remanded in custody by Stockport magistrates, charged with the murder of Rachel McGrath. Rachel was found stabbed to death outside a pub on Friday. The environment campaigner Daniel Hooper, who's better known as Swampy, has been fined £50 after admitting possessing cannabis near the site of Manchester Airport's planned second runway. Swampy was also ordered not to go within 5 miles of the runway protest after he pleaded not guilty to charges of threatening behaviour and criminal damage. Crewe magistrates granted him bail until July the 25th. And that's it. The next bulletin is a specially extended 6 o'clock news here on BBC One.
Good afternoon. Latest results from the county council elections show a surprising fight back by the Conservatives. Despite their disastrous performance in the general election, the Tories have now retaken control of Kent, Surrey and Bedfordshire. Results are expected shortly from Essex and Hertfordshire. Oxfordshire remains under no overall control. Elsewhere, there was a big surprise at Bracknell Forest in Berkshire, which the Conservatives won from Labour. The Tories also took Wokingham, this time from the Lib Dems. In the general election, there's nothing for the Tories to celebrate after an unprecedented Labour win in the South East. The Conservatives lost 20 seats in London alone. One of the most spectacular swings to Labour was in Wimbledon, where the Conservatives were defending a majority of more than 14,000, but lost. Kent, which has had no Labour MP since the 1970s, now has 8. In Berkshire, Labour made 3 gains from the Tories. And that's it. Now let's take a quick look at the weather with Suzanne Charlton.
Hello. It's another really very warm afternoon across many parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, England and Wales. The warmest weather from Lakenheath down through London and Gravesend, up to 77 degrees Fahrenheit there. Lots and lots of sunshine around for the remainder of the day. Cloudy skies in the north of Scotland though, bringing 1 or 2 light spots of rain, which will move southwards into southeast Scotland overnight, and then clouding over across the northeast of England through tomorrow with the odd spot of rain. Many other areas south and west of this having some fine, warm, sunny weather in the morning, but increased likelihood of showers arriving into the afternoon. During the daytime, still warm in the south, though not as warm as today, but the temperatures will start to drop from the north as we move through Sunday and Monday as the rain and the showers gather. And that's how it looks. Bye-bye.
If the bank holiday traffic gets you down, here's some advice for the motorist. Be courteous to other road users and drive with due care and attention. Use alternative forms of transport.
America's first space shuttle.
Never overload your vehicle. Stay within the speed limit and remember, always slow down for horses.
Just calm down, it's me, it's Marty.
No, it can't be you! I sent you back to the future!
Beware of road rage.
Why are you talking about our family ever again? I'll have you.
Happy motoring this May Day holiday with BBC One.
You're watching BBC One, the only place to be for an extra dollop of children's BBC.
Feeling down, get off the ground, turn on your TV. Wacky, funky, fun to watch, children's BBC.
Oh, hello, sorry, I just love fiddling with all the toys in this studio. There's so many. Well, it's children's BBC. A little bit later than usual, but a little bit earlier than you might have expected because of all the election news. Now, usually I'd stop here for... and show some of the pictures you've been sending in. I'd just be able to hold them in my hands. But today, this afternoon, you've got to come over here because the picture we've had in is so big, I just can't hold it up. We've had to stick it onto this post. If you take a look at this, it's great. It's children's BBC's star, Otis the Aardvark. A great picture of Otis with